Here we are again with MergeBase, and we are also very happy to have Forward Security as a guest. A quick introduction. So my name is Oscar van der Meer at MergeBase. We have as external guest Farshad Abasi, the CEO of Forward Security. We have our fractional CMO, Inge Carr, also of Altair Strategic Marketing. And then last but not least, our new CTO, Kelly West. I think marketing people have the same problem as security people. How do you get time from resources in other departments to help you get your project implemented?
So, oftentimes we operate in the application cloud security space, and the tools that we often implement in their environments are things that are related to the development pipeline. As you can imagine, tools like MergeBase and other scanners, we bundle them and we help the development team put that in their pipeline. So right off the bat, there are certain access permissions required to those pipelines where they can actually go and edit them. And then beyond that, what they need to do is, in order to security work on, use these tools, they need to create the right groups and roles in their environment. So let's say, for example, a client is using Azure or AWS, they would need to create a role in their environment that the tool can assume and do certain things that the tool needs to do. So right there, you're now dealing with having to change permissions in their DevOps pipeline. So if they're using Jenkins or Azure DevOps or whatever, you'll need to get an administrator involved so that that can let that person edit those pipelines. Often that is not going to be the engineer using that. And then you also need the person that holds the keys to the identity service or identity access management service. And in many organizations, that would be the team that manages Active Directory, or in organizations that are using Google Identity, that'd be the team that manages that identity. So it's often a central IT team or an operational team. So now you got your DevOps team involved who needs to provision permissions to the CI/CD pipelines or one of the pipelines, and you got your IT team that needs to come and give you access control, and then you got the actual end user who's the developer that wants to just install this and start using it. So it can often be more people depending on how large the enterprise is. In smaller, medium-sized enterprises, often ends there. But if you have larger enterprises, there often might be secondary approvers or other parties involved in that process. But that's all in terms of the implementation and rollout. What about before rolling it out? What about actually buying the tool? And then there are a number of parties that could be involved there in terms of who actually uses the tool, who approves the buying that tool, who approves the budget, who signs off on it. And again, in small companies, that could just be two people. It's the end user, the engineer, and the CTO often. But when you go to a larger organization, now the CFO has to approve it as well because of some budgetary constraints. And then you run into hurdles there is not just from a financial perspective, like convincing them, but also prioritizing, because a lot of companies, especially in the current economic times, have a limited amount of budget to work with, right? So why would they buy the tool that we're talking about versus spending that somewhere else in their security? And the typical organization, budgets for about 10% of their annual revenue for IT, and then only 10% for security. So it's like a really small fraction of their budget.
10% of 10%, basically.
10% of percent, which is really small, right? And that's all they got to work with. So why should they buy MergeBase or Eureka or product or something else where they could spend that money somewhere else? So it becomes a way of prioritizing and really showing the management that, hey, this should be prioritized. And how do you go about it, right? So one way is to take a risk-based approach to really saying, hey, this is the risk that we're going to face if we don't implement this product, and then really prioritizing in that risk-based manner, saying, hey, this year there are 6 security initiatives in front of us, but these 2 pose the highest risk, right? Because as we all know, software supply chain and all the software security problems are at the front and center. So by really presenting that risk view to the people that are in charge of signing off for it, will help the buyer be more successful in that journey.
Yeah, well, I think it has changed over the years. I mean, I've first talking a little bit about the budgeting and then perhaps on the implementation. But on the budgeting, a few years ago, I would spend a lot of time kind of helping people make a business case and to essentially get the importance of application security and software composition analysis across the footlight. But that has kind of changed because we've seen that software supply chain attacks have increased tenfold over the last 2 years. So a lot of organizations kind of are moving in that direction. There's a lot of regulations coming as well, or are here already in a number of different industries. So I think there's also predictions from Gartner that I think in 2 years, 80% of companies will have a software composition analysis solution in place. So the discussion on the budgeting kind of is shifting a little bit. Yeah, the budget is one thing for the tool, but that's actually not the total impact on the organization. Okay, now we have the budget for the tool, but it has a massive impact potentially, these security processes, on the productivity of our engineers. And so that is becoming a much bigger concern. And so we're having a lot of discussions on like the productivity features that we have in our tool that can really help organizations, avoid, negative impact on productivity. I think that's the majority of the time, I think, that we are spending right now. And then once you get into implementation, I think you're running into a lot of these issues that you mentioned. I mean, for instance, one of our customers has purchased SSO and still not a year later has not implemented single sign-on, right? Because they needed to get a Microsoft Active Directory kind of administrator to perhaps do probably 20 minutes worth of work, but that can be very, very difficult if you don't have direct control over that type of resource, apparently. And we're seeing similar things with, potential sometimes firewall changes are needed. We've had customers who installed kind of, new Kubernetes security features, and suddenly a lot of things stopped working, and it takes quite a bit of time to fix. So it's often little things that are difficult to plan for. Right, it's not that we're saying, oh, okay, well, we need 2,000 hours of somebody, and here, kind of it's all approved. No, we need 20 minutes of somebody, and that can be more difficult than the 2,000 hours. Sometimes it feels like.
Well, I actually just recently, I had dinner with a friend. He's an application architect for Shopify, and we were talking about the challenges of putting tools like this in place, and given that all the predictions from Gartner and all the trends are suggesting that the same way everybody has a firewall for network security, everybody's going to have to secure their software supply chain. It's going to be ubiquitous. But the path there is difficult for a lot of the stakeholders involved. And he said, he used this phrase, and it really resonated with me. If you want to roll out a tool like that, especially in an agile shop where autonomy is spread out amongst a large number of teams, you need them to believe it's not going to increase their technical toil. And technical toil is the phrase he used that landed, that this can't be a tool that slows things down and just adds work. And so the critical part of things like, SCA tools is not identifying all the vulnerabilities and creating a long to-do list. It's actually streamlining remediation processes and providing guidance and reducing false positives, reducing that technical toil. But he also said, you're going to have to convince people of that. And so it's a bit of a change management exercise that way.
A sales call that's the first thing some of them will ask is is this going to slow down our CI/CD pipeline? They're really, one of the clients was like, my developers pay attention to every second that this thing takes. If this, they measure the seconds, if this is going to slow it down, they're not going to want this. So to your point, the tool needs to, do a good job reducing false positives and really not be a hindrance on the agility of the DevOps pipelines, which is one of the reasons that we've come up with this platform is how do we make these the results more valuable, and how do we make the more results more meaningful, and then be able to give the developer what they need in a quicker time frame by correlating and aggregating all the issues that come from different data points and data sources. But again, we need to convey that message to people that are up above us. So as an engineer that's going to buy this, they need to understand, and then they need to convey that appropriately to the other people that are involved in that decision-making process.
And it all sometimes feels that on the one hand, security is kind of now accepted. Yes, we need to have strong security, but the fact that security needs to be an integrated part of engineering is kind of still a work in progress, I think. Is that kind of a way to describe it? Or?
And I'd like just to add to that, how many times, even when I was at HSBC, I go to the developers and I'm like, oh, how's it going with that SaaS or SCA tool that we bought you? They're like, we turned it off. I'm like, why'd you turn it off? The answer was that it takes a long time to scan. And when it does, it produces too many false positives, right? And usually when I go to clients, I'm like, hey, if you want to be successful with this program, number one thing you need to do is before you put this in your pipelines, you need to reach a baseline level of 0 issues. So take that time and help do that initial cleanup. Like if you're going to put MergeBase or any other SaaS or SCA tool in place, before you go into automation, run it manually, clean everything up. So all the tech debt is removed. Either the false positives were identified and excluded, or you fix them. Now you've got a baseline of 0 issues. Now you can put it in the development pipeline. So if tomorrow someone introduces a new vulnerability and I do a pull request, hey, that's on me. I just checked in a new piece of code. It had a vulnerability. That one issue that's found, that's something I got to fix, right? As opposed to how most companies are doing it. They just buy the tool, they put it in, and then it just keeps reporting all the tech debt. So every time the developer does a pull request, they're getting 200 issues reported, and they just will stop using that tool, right?
That's right.
Okay.
And I think we actually face some headwinds because people in this space might have been exposed to some of the open source tools or some of the first generation tools that were really good at creating problems and not really good at helping you fix them. And they haven't seen more sophisticated tools like Eureka or like MergeBase, where actually streamlining that remediation is the focus.
Like, I just want to briefly go back to kind of the implementation challenges that we continuously see. And I think that's an area where we probably can learn a lot from our marketing folks, because they're struggling with this, I think, all the time. A lot of marketing initiatives require a little bit of time here and there from IT people and others. And so they seem to kind of always get that done. So Inge, how do they get that done?
Great question. And I think a lot of people are always struggling with that. I have been a software developer, so I've been in the absolute tech world. Now I'm in marketing. And so I have bridged both worlds, where I was very focused on just what was happening within my own internal technical department and looking to get things done that way. And now living completely outside of it, and indeed involving not only the technical people, the engineers on the team and in the organization, but sometimes also legal or product. Like there's always another person that we need to engage to get things done in marketing and to optimize our marketing strategy. And I think for me the key is kind of balancing our tech tools, personalization, with the human touch and that emotional connection, rather than just seeing it as a routine task. Because I think the moment we see something as a routine task, we, as maybe the one asking for this task to be done, have the complete vision, perspective of what great it will do for the organization, or great it will do for other people or our customers. But we kind of forget that we may be solitary in that. Yeah. And in today's world, things are much more fluid. We were definitely in a digital age, and now we are more in a social age, where collaboration is key. And I think it's important to find partnerships, identifying those people that not only do the process, but can influence the doers. So, for example, what I find sometimes is that implementation of a key project, and it may be something as a simple thing to do or a smaller project to implement like SCA, or a big one that really crosses the organization. I have found that successful implementation, it always hangs on to just a couple of people who actually need to put their fingers to the keyboard and actually get it done. So it is engaging those people, making it more social, understand their problem, their situation, talk with them, not only with our tech tools through email or chatting or whatever we have, but approach it on a personal level and ask them questions and evolve them and make them feel in power and in control of the task that they need to do, but make them understand the bigger picture. So explain the numbers, just explain the threat, explain the situation if it doesn't happen on time, and ask them, when can you do it? Okay, well, I can do it in 6 months. Well, we were looking for next week. What needs to happen to get this done next week? And work with them and have a conversation with them about the issue. And sometimes that is not enough. Sometimes people say, no, I'm focused on this. And then it's time to actually talk to those influencers and stars around them. And it may be their boss, but it may be a buddy on the team. And involving them and have a conversation with them as a group and create that enthusiasm and excitement, but also that, you know what, this is really urgent. We need to get this done. So approach it from that perspective, be respectful and say thank you. I think that little thank you goes a long way, and just involving them in the task, what needs to be done. Don't make them feel, oh, I just need to get this done, and oh, marketing is on my back, or oh my God, this engineer is on my back, or oh, here's the CEO with another, thing that I need to get done. So give them context and make it personal.
Yeah. So basically the key message is don't treat it like a routine task, and really the human touch is important. Now, if I talk about kind of engineers, and a lot of organizations have an agile development process, what I often hear is, people come back to me and say, well, we've asked this and this person to do something and they just don't do it, or this vendor, like, they're not responding. and then you ask, well, how did you ask them? Well, we sent them an email 4 weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, Kelly, perhaps you can talk a little bit about how can you translate that human touch that Inge is talking about into an agile development process.
Agile is implemented in slightly different ways in different organizations, but one thing that tends to be true is there's a movement to push decision-making to individual agile teams. And so instead of having sort of centralized command and control, and somebody says, please implement this tool, and that's it, it flows down the command chain, it doesn't work that way. It has to go across all of these autonomous agile teams who need to decide to, if not implement the tool, maybe only one team needs to implement it. They need to incorporate it into their practices. Often, in different agile teams with different responsibilities, different people need to do things. And so you take what Inge was talking about, and then you essentially multiply it by number of agile teams, because in each case, you have to identify how it meets their needs, how it's going to prevent technical toil for that team, how it's going to be a fit for them and can help them. One thing that I've seen, I was just talking to one of our clients recently, and they have an agile team structure with about 10 agile teams. And the approach they took is that they went to one agile team first. That team adopted the tool first, and worked with the platform team that could implement it, so that you had a direct relationship amongst the essential people right away. And then that agile team became the example. They used it actually for months before it rolled out to the other teams. And that way, for the other teams, they trust their peers a lot more than they trust probably management and vendors. And so when that agile team says, yes, we've done this, it's good for these things, it works well this way. Yes, here's some, challenges you're going to have to face down. We've done it this way. It's working for us. And that's a very powerful way to get that buy-in across the agile organization.
I was going to say, championing that. We've done that with a few clients. Like, we have one client that had 30 DevOps teams, but we started with like a small handful. I think it was 5. And we championed the processes with the 5 of them, just to demonstrate to the larger organization how well it could work, and using it as a reference, so then the rest of the company could buy into it. That's a fantastic.
Yeah. So Farshad, I think a big part of it is also creating some enthusiasm, right, within the organization about it. So you seem to me like a guy who can, do that very, very well. So what is your secret?
Well, I was just going to say, Inge touched on a really important point: adding context and building relationships, right? And you also said something about the emails. Maybe I'll talk about the emails first, right? Because we all get hundreds of emails every day, right? Like, stuff gets lost in my inbox. So it's not that I didn't like you or didn't want to respond to you. I just didn't even see it. So if you send that one email, you're like, oh, I sent the email 4 weeks ago. Chances are the person may not have even seen it. So usually what you should be doing is, maybe pick up the phone, or, better yet, happy medium is Slack or Teams, right? So what build a channel so that you can have that real-time communication, rather than an email that gets lost in the inbox. Just ping that person and have a chat, but also build a relationship. Like, I know at the bank, I'd have certain situations where I'd file a ticket for an IT change request. And it would take weeks and no one would respond. You know what I did is I ended up meeting the people in that team and just building relationships with them. Once they got to know me, I needed whatever, it was done instantly. I needed that ticket. My tickets would get prioritized because I knew them and I was a nice guy, right? So it's just like building relationships, not relying on email to get things faster, and then just championing things and setting an example. And then the other thing that Inge, you said, is the context, really making people understand what the risks are, right? Like a lot, even developers themselves. If I just go say, hey, you got all these vulnerabilities, you got to fix them. They're like, why do I need to fix them? But when I go threat model it, I'm like, hey, here's an attack scenario. Attacker does A, B, C, D, and then there it is. They can exploit this vulnerability. They're like, whoa, okay, I didn't know. But you bring that real life context, you actually form it in English and you present that threat scenario. That makes a world of difference. And all of a sudden it is real. They can touch it. They see, oh yeah, the attack step one, the passwords can be found from any breach password database. Number two, you don't have this, you have this particular vulnerability. They can use X, Y, and Z and exploit it. And the outcome is every record in your database is now dumped into the public, right? That brings more context and it makes it real. Hey, if we didn't have the SCA tool, or if we weren't doing automated scanning or whatever, we could be missing these issues, and this is what could happen to us. So making it more real, adding context, it's a really good way to get buy-in for sure, and building relationships.
And added to that, Farshad, I also think the context, indeed, exactly what you're talking about, like for the organization, but also for them. Don't make them feel that they are at the bottom of the totem pole and they're just an implementer. Demonstrate how important their role is. That, you know, we're all even and equal within this organization, and we all have an important role and function to fill. And the person you're asking the question to do something is make them understand and make them feel that that's the place you're coming from, that, you know, this is important, you are important, and having that personalization, I think, is important.
It's all back to kind of, even though we're all dealing in IT, it's all back to the human touch. So that's the key.
That was the first thing my boss taught me when I got my first job. He was like, it's all about relationships. Like he said, if in this job, if you want to succeed, you got to build relationships with the development team. And then the other thing was, he told me, is about the emails. He's like, you know, don't just send emails, message them or call them, because you know you're not going to get traction if firing emails away.
But you also mentioned something very important earlier, Farshad, which I think is reputation building. That's how I would encapsulate it. It's like if people start to get to know you and know you are not just asking something just for asking, just to make their life more difficult and put more work on them. But if they really know, hey, if so-and-so asks me something, there is a real reason, and I like working with that person, so let me get this done, I think is a very important thing. And added to that too is what I find, and I didn't think I talked about that earlier, it's bartering. Sometimes when the person says, but I got this and that on my plate, I don't have the time right now, it's like, okay, I get that. We're all crazy busy and we're just getting busier and busier the more we need to get things done. So what is on your plate that I can take off your plate, like, or make it a less of a priority that you think is a priority right now? Or what can I do for you? Like me personally, is there something I can do for you that will help you make your life easier, type of thing?
It's all back to the human touch and building relationships, and, you know, if needed, you know, bartering. So hopefully, you know, this conversation is helping our audience to kind of get the projects across the goal line quicker. And so especially when you implement application security tools, like advanced tools that, you know, Forward Security and MergeBase are using, and they actually will help you with engineer productivity, but still you need to get a tool in place as well. So I'm happy to have had this conversation. Thank you all very much. Thank you.